everybody, it's me, Garrett Everett from Garrett Everett Blackwater. Just wanted to do another tank feature. This is my 30-gallon tank. It's a subtropical tank, loosely themed on a White Cloud Mountain river stream, Asian river stream. Turns out that I don't actually have White Cloud Mountain minnows. I have Vietnamese minnows, which are a little bit of a different thing. But yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about it and let you see parts of it up close. This definitely has evolved beyond my original vision. So let's take a look. So this aquarium was initially set up when I moved. I had a 35-gallon aquarium and we moved everything. We did substrate inside, took the fish out, of course, and as many shrimp as I could catch. Moved, set it up, had it running for a couple of weeks, and then discovered that the bottom had cracked, whether from placing the large stone inside of it, or just through the moving stress, or just plain old bad luck. It was definitely, the old tank was a very DIY tank. Somebody had built it. The bottom was a mirror. It was initially designed as a terrarium, but I did water testing and I had it running for about a year. So I felt confident that it would work fine, but we had the crack, and all of a sudden there was a puddle of water on the floor, and it was going down between the floorboards into the basement. So I had to replace that in a hurry. The downside is it had only been running for 2 weeks. So found this 30-gallon on Kijiji for a really good price. Picked it up, threw everything in there, and unfortunately that meant that this thing had to establish itself twice. Part of that involved taking the substrate out, keeping it in a bucket overnight, and so that meant that a lot of my microfauna died. So that includes Malaysian trumpet snails, who generally want to stay inside the anoxic layer, which is like the top inch or so of substrate, so they can still come up and get their oxygen out of the water. If they need to, they'll come up to the surface, but if they're buried below that, in this case below 4 to 5 gallons of substrate, they can't hack it, and they can't really survive. I don't even know if they can hibernate. So when I set this up again, I also dropped in a bunch of Amano red self-hardening clay pellets in the bottom, which is probably overload. It's always good to seed your substrate. This was definitely my first go at it, so it definitely was oversaturated with iron, oversaturated with some bad fertilizer that I used. I just had some Miracle Grow that I was like, oh, clay can store nutrients for a long time, so I'll just add a couple of drops to each of these clay balls. And of course, since this was the second time setting it up, and we already had a whole bunch of nutrients in there that hadn't had time to settle, there was some massive algae problems. The worst was staghorn. There's a little bit flapping around in the breeze there, which we'll take a closer look. But yeah, so I'm still battling that. The big thing that's helped me is reducing my photo period. I just added, right now I'm running at 6 hours a day. I just added today a further 2-hour period in the morning, and that's honestly my babysitter period. There's nothing to do with siesta session there. That's just my baby eats, and I need to get ready for work, and my wife needs to get ready for work, and rather than plop him in front of the TV, we throw him in front of the aquarium, and it's great. He loves it. He'll sit there for almost an hour, just happy as a clam. So initially this was designed to be an island style aquascape, so that basically means you build up hardscape in the center, plants in the center, and then the fringes are kept lower, so either foreground plants, or you've got, you know, just open sand or open soil. Of course, I picked up some plants on a whim, and they overtook the tank, and it looked fantastic. So I rolled with it. You know, tanks evolve, especially in their first few months of operation, and for some people they continue evolving for years while they're set up. So this one started out with a large chunk, a wooden stump, which you can kind of barely see in the center there, and that was pulled out of my backyard. That's a tree that's been dead for a while. It's fairly rotted out on the inside. There's lots of tunnels from insects and stuff. So a chunk of hardscape this large, that's not an aquatic wood that's designed to sink. The best way to get it to sink in your aquarium is either to adhere it to something heavy or a panel, So you can try with egg crate. Slate might be better if you can bore a hole in it, then add a fastener. Nothing that rusts. Honestly, it's going to be buried under the substrate, so it probably won't be a huge deal if it does. But you basically want it to stay attached to that panel for as long as possible. The other option is to throw it in a large Rubbermaid tub and just pour boiling water on it, and that's what I did. So it took me about a week of pouring water on it. There were several fragments of it. There's an even larger bit out in my front yard right now that will look fantastic in an aquarium sometime, but I just don't have one for it. I thought about putting it in my new 55 gallon, but ended up going with a mangrove estuary instead. So I'm still hanging on to that. Might even throw it in a tub so it can saturate over a few weeks or months, and then maybe one day I'll have a use for it. Maybe I won't. Yeah, so that's got a nice coating of algae. There's some of like the green stuff, green spot algae, I guess, which is fairly inoffensive. There's also still staghorn going on it. Yeah, like I said before, the algae breakout was pretty rough. I've been dealing with it with lights, but because I had so much iron, which is a big old thing for staghorn, it loves iron, and it loves ammonia, so all of those dead trumpet snails and other invertebrates that were trapped under the substrate were and probably continue to leach ammonia, and it loves that, so it found a foothold and it's just been in there. I do have an Amano Shrimp in here somewhere. I see him, once a month or less frequently, but he is there. He showed up just this last week, so he's working on it. I might get him some friends. The other thing that I have in here for invertebrates, there's hypothetically 50 or 60 red cherry shrimp. Same thing with the Amano. I see, one a day or one a week, but they're in there. I think some of them might have been hunted down. I did keep a paradise fish in here. I believe it was a male, but it's still kind of in puberty, so he's being moved down to my 55 gallon just to kind of keep the filter going and cycled, and because he was bullying the shrimp. I caught him a couple of times eating them, which is, that's what nature does. It paves the way for itself quite ruthlessly at times. I do also have white cloud mountain minnows, or rather those are Vietnamese minnows, also known as cardinal minnows. They're very similar to white cloud mountain minnows, they just prefer things to be a little bit warmer. So white cloud mountain minnows, they can go down to 5 degrees for several weeks with no ill effect, because they do live in a mountainous region. These guys, they prefer things a bit warmer, so ideally, 15, well ideally I guess you'd want to have it at room temperature, so 20 degrees, but they're cool down to 15. Their metabolism slows down, but they don't really get sick. They just are less active and eat less, which isn't all bad either. They seem to be hiding way in the back here. So they're in that stand of Hygrophila siamensis, and they just stay back there for now, ever since I took out the paradise fish this week. So that's strange, because I thought he was pushing them around, but it turns out he actually acted as a dither fish. So basically a fish that helps the other fish feel comfortable. What else do I have in here? Variety of snails. I did have small ram's horns, but I think they got picked off by the paradise fish. I also have some red ram's horns, a little bit larger. So the small ram's horns are like 1.5 millimeters, 2 millimeters at most. The red ram's horns, those are probably closer to 1 centimeter across, and they're kind of working in the background. You see them every once in a while, but they just go to town in the algae. A bunch of bladder snails are in here. I know I've got worms kicking around in the mulm and in the substrate, so lots of little workers, your little cleanup crew, keeping themselves busy. For plants, this is Hygrophila siamensis. It's a bit dusty because of water changes or whatever. There's probably a little bit of algae on the bottom leaves, but overall this plant was a surprise favorite of mine. I picked it up on a whim. I initially went in and I grabbed, I just wanted low-tech plants, so I got some crypts, and I got a bit of rotala, and I was just gonna go from there and see what happened. And the crypts they're in there. They're doing well in the low light situations. The higher light spots where there's not so much cover, They are a little bit algae covered, but you just go in and take a leaf off here and there. So they're struggling to keep up a bit, but the Hygrophila is absolutely insane. I started out with, I think, like a half a dozen stems maybe. Everything that's in here has been repropagated from those half a dozen stems. It grows like nuts. It loves flow. It hasn't been doing very well in my Blackwater pool biotope, as I showed you, but it is it's doing quite well in here. And that just repropagates off of trimmings. It's extremely adaptable. If you leave it floating, it'll grow leaves at both ends and just throw out floating roots. If it is planted, it grows an extensive root structure and then throws down roots and pulls itself along. And just kind of spreads like that, throwing out new shoots. I've had one in here. I believe it is this guy. Was actually just a large leaf floating around for a week or two. And then I noticed the leaf had roots, so I planted it, and now we've got a plant that's about 10 centimeters tall. So that's pretty nuts. This is a very adaptable plant. I highly recommend it. Under ideal lighting conditions, which mine aren't, the light I've got on here is around 4,000 K, and I think it worked out to about, it's LED, but it worked out to just over 2 watts per gallon. But if you've got a really nice light, daylight bulbs, this thing, it'll go nuts, and it'll start turning red or pink even, I've heard of. So definitely recommend picking this up. Hygrophila siamensis, really good plant for planted tanks. Probably best used as a background plant, but I throw little shoots in the front and just keep them trimmed down, and they look pretty cool up foreground plants too. On this side of the tank, we've got a nice looking clump of Rotella rotundifolia. I started out, I had a couple of these peas that I just got randomly with the shrimp, and then ended up buying some more from the store because I was taking a while to establish itself. But it's doing quite well. I've once again started out with a handful of stems and managed to repropagate it kind of across the tank. I like jungle style planting. It's a bit messier, but it feels more natural to me. Once again, this is a background plant, but you can use it as a foreground plant as well. And it looks great as long as you keep it trimmed down. Maybe let one grow up wild here or there. Let's see if we got one. Yeah, see? There you go. Foreground Rotella. I think it looks nice. In the back, there's some Alternithera reinecke, which is commonly known as Scarlet temple plant. I bought this from PetSmart. It has not been doing as well as the other plants. So the Rotella, the Hygrophila, and the Cryptocoreans, those were all purchased from a local fish shop, Nestor's Aquariums. Really great quality plants. The price is up there, but the quality is worth it. Whereas this Scarlet temple plant is supposed to be a bit of a fast grower, kind of like all these other stem plants, hasn't been performing. So I don't know whether that was because of the bad conditions at the store, or maybe it's not having a good time trying to compete with the other plants. I'm not sure. Maybe it'll take off in a bit. But anyway, nice little spot of red way in the back. Probably can't even see them from here. There they are. Peekaboo. So I'm hoping they take off. I'm hoping they're just off to a slow start, and that we get a nice little accent color in the back there. Up front here, got a bit of a log jam happening. That's to disperse the flow of the filter, which is right here. I ride my filter side saddle. I really like it, especially in this one, because I'm trying to go for a bit of a stream setting. So it gets across the whole tank. Having it up in the front here gets it. It can all go past the stump there. The fish have a nice natural thing. They do seem to shelter on the other side of the tank, but when there was a paradise fish in here, they would often be found here in the open. So I'm actually very surprised that they're hiding. Yeah, so the log jam disperses the flow. I was having some issues. There's actually like a full part of the stump there too. But I was having issues with sand erosion. You can see down there. I'll maybe even zoom in a bit. A lot of these rocks were buried under the sand, and they've just been brought up by the action of the trumpet snails underneath, and erosion, and just constant pressure from filter flow. So there's a little apple snail, baby apple snail shell, right there. You can also see there's lots of duckweed caught in there. That's a big feature of this tank. Up on the surface, I've got hornwort, and I've got duckweed. Duckweed is a pain in the butt. forced me to change up my filter solution, which I'll talk about another time. But it does a really good job of removing nitrates. It just makes your tank look kind of messy. But once again, nature is messy. Let's keep that in mind. So you'll see a few, they're getting sucked into the filter output, pushed down. Kind of makes it look messy. Once again, I get in there with tweezers and just knock them around sometimes, but it doesn't do much. So the nice thing about having the hornwort up top and the duckweed up top is that they're kind of symbiotic and holding each other together. So the duckweed will often, here, check that out. The duckweed will often spread across the entire top of the aquarium. Now I cleared it out. I cut it back to about 50% of the aquarium last week. You can see it's already, 75, 80% capacity up top there. It grows like crazy. It takes up nitrates like crazy. It's actually a good food source for a lot of fish. So if you've got live bears, they'll take advantage of it. A paradise fish took advantage of it. So it is annoying. Once you get it in your tank, you're probably not going to get it out, but it does serve a purpose there. So if you can learn to love the mess a bit, I'd say it's worth having some in your tank. Other plants that I have in here, a couple of Anubius spread throughout the tank. Here's one. Here's another. It's having some algae problems, and there is one back there. You can barely see it standing out there. So those are some of the first plants that I bought, and I repropagated it into several other plants. But I bought that when I had my initial betta fish because it was supposed to be an easy beginner plant, and it doesn't grow much because it's an Anubius, but it serves its purpose. Bettas love it. Unfortunately, I had some apple snails. They also loved it, which is weird. Anubius, Java fern, that stuff is supposed to be kind of off limits to even the hungriest of plant eaters. My apple snails did not care. They mowed through it. They took down new shoots. They started working on the old, tough, leathery leaves. They had no mercy, so I had to move that out of there into a separate tank. Substrate is very thick. This is a mix of clay and sand, so there's some play sand, just natural river sand in there, and then I also had a bag of that red play sand which I mixed in. A lot of Asian environments are very much heavy in reddish rocks, iron-rich rocks, and iron-rich clay, so I figured I'd try to be as authentic as possible and keep things a bit red. It's quite nice. It's a nice change up from your classic aqua soils and your usual white beach sand, pristine pool filter sand. It looks a bit more earthy. I think, to me at least, it feels closer to the Biotope, and so that's why I use it. You can see gas bubbles in there. That's denitrification in action, theoretically. So this is a benefit of deep sand beds. This thing is about 3 inches tall, so I'll just drop my finger in there. Yeah, I have large hands. So I would say that this is comparable to a deep sand bed. Not a lot goes on down there except for plant roots. So those bubbles in there, gas bubbles that you can see, those are the boogeyman. Everybody's scared of those gas bubbles, but really they don't do much in a tank. I've had gas bubbles in this tank and the previous setup for over a year. No harm. Sometimes you get them bubbling up to the top, but the gas exchange rate is so low that you don't have to worry about it. That other layer on top there, that's about 3/4 of an inch. That's all mulm. So that's decomposed plant matter. That's coconut fiber. That's snail and fish poop. And that's a breeding ground for worms and other invertebrates. They love it. They go nuts in there, and that provides an auxiliary food source for your fish, which is great. It's nice to have, especially if you plan on raising fry. That's awesome. Something else that you'll notice with this tank is a distinct lack of aquatic botanicals, which is kind of core to the Blackwater system. So as I explained in my first video, Blackwater, whitewater, clearwater, black mud rivers, this is really more of a tinted clearwater setup, but we can call it Blackwater for what it is. It just doesn't have the acidic qualities because I use tap water rather than RO water. RO water might be in the future. I don't know if for this tank specifically, just because I think the minnows like it kind of around a stable, 6 to 7.5 pH kind of thing, low hardness. So I don't want to mess with them. This tank's set up for them, so probably won't use RO water, but no botanicals in here. There's wood, there's a bit of bark. For the initial few weeks, the wood leached a lot. It was almost like this deep, deep red. It was beautiful. But because of the algae situation that happened, I have to do 50% water changes every week, which is a lot, and that takes the tint out of there. So I've been trying a few strategies to try to keep the tint in there, but mostly it just rebuilds itself. So there's no dead leaves in there. There is wood and a little bit of bark, but not a tremendous amount. So most of the tint that you're seeing is coming just right out of the wood, right out of that stump. Yeah, the unfortunate thing is, because of the algae issues, I just don't want to introduce additional sources of ammonia, nitrates, just decomposing parts of the leaves, which is too bad. But maybe once the situation sorts itself out and the plants are established enough, that might be a time to start throwing things in. But I kind of like how this thing evolved from being just a stump island into this beautiful thriving jungle. So there you have it. That's the 30-gallon Asian Clearwater Stream Biotope. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned a few things. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.